in art history there's a very interesting moment, and that is when Edweard Muybridge is doing his photographs. And this is the early day of photography. And Muybridge, with his photo projects of the moving animals, was also, in a way, the first originator of the moving film. And what he did was, he started the project because they were going to prove whether the horse had a moment with all four legs off the ground or not. To do this, he set up a sort of long trigger of cameras, and then they presented these as singular images on a wall. Now apparently what happened then was that there was an outrage, because you suddenly saw all these moments that people had not otherwise painted, and this was the early day of photography, so they wouldn't have photographed them. So you suddenly had all these images that didn't really live up to what people's expectations of how horses should look. And he was quite hated for this. So then to present his work, he was frustrated because he couldn't present the singular images. He then animated them to make them look more acceptable. So already then in the 1870s, we have a break in the representation of the horse, where people are reacting to that this is not truthful in a way. They are questioning the singular one moment in time as to whether it is truthful or could have been. And I find this very interesting. What are we now, like 150, almost 150 years later, and horse people are still coming with the same criticism and frustration that they think the singular one moment in time does not represent anything, represent any truthful movement or position of the horse, or whatever one may call it. So you have, before then, you have the paintings, and it is quite horrendous. You even go back to Greek statues, they're all with their mouths open and rolling eyes. So this has been very, very conventional. And in such a way, I also see my own work, which I'm doing at the moment on sports horses, as extremely conventional. And they're making portraits of rich people's horses, rolling their eyes and opening their mouths. I mean, this is what artists have been doing for several hundred years. There's nothing new about it. So what is new? Why do some suddenly become, that you're almost an activist or criticised for something, while on the other hand, you're a fine artist? The horse sports world very much fetishises certain moments of movement which are acceptable to be used. So that what you're basically doing is you trying to find the one moment you can take the photograph, and it's a very limited range of movements that are acceptable. It is usually when the legs are in flexion, when the neck is in flexion, and if you go through the different horse sports, you can actually identify, I would say there's about 5 to 10 acceptable positions in each of them. As a fine artist, I'm always sort of trained to point or to have my interest where other people are not. So I started pointing my camera, instead of trying to get these trophy shots, the one moment, I just started photographing everything else, and gave up the idea of selling into magazines what I would consider very romanticised images. I mean, there is a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that you really don't want to see. Now, when people take those photos often, they are accused of being bad photographers. If you look at the history of representing horses, you generally through history have horses with open mouths and rolling eyes. A lot of paintings done are of that. So if you would interpret that as horses in pain or horses in fear, there's nothing new to be seen when you photograph the warm-up at a show. But what I think, when you have these singular images that are always being used in the horse press, it is always usually with the mouth shut. So what you do find is that this is a very, very idealized moment. When we published the photographs of Helgestrand, there was all this criticism of one moment in time, which I think is really good that came up, and that you question, the nature of photography. Is this truthful or not? Does it represent what is actually going on? Because what the horse press does, they use all these photographs, which I would claim do not represent what is going on, and they do not represent the whole truth. So that when you then start pointing your camera at what is behind scenes or out of this very standard photo, you see all sorts of things. I'm always when I'm photographing jumping, I'm the one, my camera's going off in the wrong moments. It's not going off when both front legs are over the jump like that. I'm doing it in the landing or between the fences. I think it's really interesting to see what's going on between. I love using the camera still. I do think, moving image video versus single shots, they just give us different kind of information. So where they're both limited, but together they complement. And, freezing the moments between the fences, that's when you get really interesting shots, where you see the horses doing things that you don't believe they could do, and where you see the riders and you can really... So obviously, as soon as my camera's going off in between fences, people are going like, what the fuck's going on there? He's not doing the right shots. It's just so regulated, and that is why I think it's so interesting that you get this criticism from people that they don't believe a moment in time and stuff like that, because that is the whole horse industry deeply believes in moments in time. You just look at the catalogues of what people are selling. They believe in those one singular glamour moments. And it's so regulated where you're supposed to point your camera and to what time. So there I am pointing where everyone else points in that direction, and I'm pointing it the other direction, and I'm shooting it off at the wrong moments. And this people pick up on really fast.
We feel lucky to watch this. We don't think they're nasty like you do. I think you're horrible people.
Yeah?
I do. I think you're so horrible. You really upset me.
It's really interesting. And some people might sort of get quite aggressive and say, why are you photographing that, and start accusing me.
I think you're horrible people.
Yeah?
I do. I think you're so horrible. You really upset me. This horse is not suffering.
While others simply become quite curious. We were actually together, we were at a venue in Sweden photographing, and I was photographing the hooves, which I'm really interested in hooves. So to get close to these horses' hooves, you just photograph them and you see it looking at them. And we were sitting together with someone who I don't know, but that asked my partner, is he making photos for Epona? And this was before the Helgeström photos, I think. And I thought that was really interesting, that she picked out, that I wasn't doing the standard photographs with all the other photographers. She immediately assumed there was something whiffy about it, and it was Epona. I don't think she was negative about it. It was just a question.